Continuing with our survey of fluids and the autonomic nervous system, it's time to talk about what is arguably the most important cellular machine of the human body. It's the sodium-potassium pump. You should have learned about this in Bio 156, and you should have heard about it again in Bio 201. Let's make sure everybody's totally on board with this, okay? So the sodium-potassium pump, the Na plus K plus ATPase, remember A's means that it's an enzyme. Why is it an ATPase? Because it requires ATP. So the sodium-potassium pump moves 3 sodiums out to the ECF as it moves 2 potassiums in to the ICF. Remember, that created the gradients needed for the action potential. So this is a pump that strongly determines the ion concentrations of the ECF and the ICF. So if it's moving 3 sodiums outside of the cell to the ECF, and it's moving 2 potassiums into the ICF, what do you suppose is the most common cation? Remember, cation means positively charged ion. What is the most common cation of the ECF? Yes, sodium, because the sodium-potassium pump keeps pumping it out there. What do you suppose is the most common cation of the ICF? Yes, potassium, because the sodium-potassium pump keeps pumping it in. Remember, that's why in the action potential you had voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels that controlled and created the action potential, all right? So it burns 1 ATP per cycle, so it's not free. You have to pay money in the form of ATP. Remember, this is a form of active transport, not passive transport. This is not diffusion. We actually have to spend energy in order to get it to work. Sodium-potassium pump burns about 40% of the body's ATP at rest. Think about that. You know that they say a typical person is 2,000 calories a day. 40%, that would be 800. So you burn 800 calories a day just powering your sodium-potassium pumps. They're working all the time, 24/7, 365. Even right now, when you're just sitting there farting and thinking about sex, the sodium-potassium pump is working its ass off, all right? Burns 40% of your total body's energy at rest, okay? This was discovered in the 1950s by Danish biophysicist Jan Christian Skau, who was awarded the Nobel Prize in 1997 because this is such a monumentally important machine of your body. And for our purposes this semester, we need to always know about where we're going to find ions, where we're going to have more and less, and so on. Sodium-potassium pump is the major determinant of ion concentrations in the fluids of our body. And there's Drake demonstrating the sodium-potassium pump for you. All right, 3 sodiums out, 2 potassiums in, 3 sodiums out, 2 potassiums in, and you have to spend that ATP. Okay. Now, let's talk about cations in the ECF and the ICF. Cations, again, means that's not cation. Cation, that means a positively charged ion. All right, so we already talked about this. Sodium is the principal cation of the ECF. Potassium is the principal cation of the ICF. That has to be the case because of the sodium-potassium pump. Pumping those 3 sodiums out and 2 potassiums in 24/7, 365. That can be predicted, again, from knowing the sodium-potassium pump. The ion concentrations, you don't have to memorize this. If you know the existence of the sodium-potassium pump, you will always immediately know the most common cation of both the ECF and the ICF, all right? Now, the body moves water and solutes between ECF and ICF to keep these ion concentrations in balance. That's always happening, all right? So, you remember, you're always moving fluids and solutes around inside of your body. Nice graph there on the left showing, as you can see, look, in the ECF, sodium by far most common, ICF, potassium. Now notice that both of them occur in both ECF and ICF, and there are other ions as well. But overall, sodium is the most common by far in the ECF, and potassium is the most common by far in the ICF. Let's talk about anions. Anions are negatively charged ions. So, Chloride is the principal anion of the ECF, and this is easy to remember because what do you put on your French fries? What do you line the rims of your mojito and margarita glasses with? You line them with sodium chloride, which is table salt. Chloride in the human body always goes where sodium goes. So wherever you find most of the sodium, you will find most of the chloride. See how easy this is? That's all you have to remember. Chloride always goes with sodium. Just think of French fries and margaritas, all right? Chloride is the principal anion of the ECF. Now, the bicarbonate ion is another important anion of the ECF. It's the buffer of the ECF. Buffers are things that help control acid-base balance. So bicarbonate, and if you work in a hospital setting, you know one of the things they can put into a drip, into an IV is bicarb, all right? Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. So bicarbonate is very common, and we're going to see how the bicarbonate ion is made. You actually make it inside of your body. You use water and carbon dioxide to make it. But you need to know the bicarbonate ion is the principal buffer of the ECF, and it is the third most common ion of the ECF. Looking inside of the cells now, we have the phosphate ion, HPO4 2-. That's the principal anion of the ICF and of the urine. It's also the principal buffer of the ICF. Your body has to control acid-base balance. If you don't, if you go too acidic or too basic, in physiology we say alkaline. So you can go into a state of acidosis or alkalosis. Your body is constantly having to buffer your fluids to prevent you from going into acidosis and alkalosis. So what ions do the buffering? Bicarbonate does the buffering in the ECF. Phosphate does the buffering in the ICF. Okay? Now, inside of cells are basically protein factories. That's where you make all your body's proteins. So there are huge numbers of proteins inside your cell. Sometimes they're made inside the cell, and your cell intends them to leave and go other places to do their jobs. But they still are made inside the cells. So that means there are tons of proteins. And it turns out, once again, remember, proteins are made of amino acids. Amino acids can pick up and let go of hydrogens according to the surrounding pH. Because of our basic physiological pH, proteins tend to have more negatively charged residues on the amino acids than positively charged. So overall, proteins tend to have a negative charge. All right? So phosphate, bicarbonate, and protein ions are the principal buffering systems of the body and help regulate pH. Proteins also do some buffering because those amino acids can either grab hydrogens or let go of hydrogens. So once again, just to review, what are the three main ions of the ECF? The three main ions of the ECF are sodium, chloride, and bicarbonate. What are the three main ions of the ICF? Three main ions of the ICF are potassium, phosphate, and protein ions. Okay? So here's the bicarbonate ion. I said that we were going to see how it's made, and that's what we're going to see right now. When carbon dioxide is dissolved in water, it forms carbonic acid. Okay? Carbonic acid dissociates, like all acids do, into, in this case, a hydrogen ion and a bicarbonate ion. So look down at the bottom, you see the equation there. When you mix carbon dioxide and water, you get carbonic acid. Now, even if you've never taken chemistry before, I'm sure you know how to count letters, all right? So look at CO2 and H2O. How many total H's are there? 2, right? How many total C's are there? 1. How many total O's are there? Well, there's 2 in the CO2 and 1 in the H2O. So therefore, just put them together. H2CO3. You don't need to know chemistry, you just need to know your alphabet and be able to count letters. What happens is acids in solution dissociate. Strong ions really dissociate. Strong acids completely dissociate. Weak acids only partially dissociate. Carbonic acid is a weak acid, but it will partially dissociate into a hydrogen ion. Remember, that's the acid part. and the bicarbonate ion, which is the base part, okay, the HCO3 minus, and there we have the bicarbonate ion. Bicarbonate ion is the conjugate base. So you may know that from chemistry, or maybe they talked about that in Bio 156. Doesn't make any difference. I'm just trying to show you here how we make bicarbonate ion. Let's just take a look one more time. It's worth it. You mix carbon dioxide and water, all right? There's tons of carbon dioxide inside of your body. Remember, it's the main waste product of aerobic respiration. Water, obviously there's tons of water. So you always have lots and lots and lots of carbon dioxide and water inside your body. They will come together to form carbonic acid, and then they will partially dissociate into the hydrogen ion, which is the acid, and the bicarbonate ion, which is the base. Hydrogen ion is the acid, bicarbonate ion is the base. And there you go. You see the reaction can run this way. There is a principle in chemistry, the principle of Le Chatelier, which says that if you have more reagents on one side of the equation, then the equation will flow in that direction, all right? So if you've got a lot of CO2 and H2O, they will make carbonic acid, which will then dissociate. When you do that, you're going to lower the pH by creating more H pluses. The H plus is acid. Remember pH? What does pH mean? Pauvre hydrogène. Damn French people. That means, remember, technically it is the negative log of the hydrogen ion concentration. So basically, in other words, pH is a measure of how much hydrogen is around. Low pH means there's a lot of hydrogen because it's the negative log. At any rate, bottom line is when the equation runs this way, you are producing free hydrogens, so you are making acid. On the other hand, if the equation runs in this direction, and it can, the reaction, I say equation, reaction, this is the equation of the reaction. When the reaction runs in this direction, hydrogen will bind with the bicarbonate ion to form carbonic acid, H2CO3, which can then break apart into CO2 and H2O. That's going to raise pH by binding the hydrogen. What we're going to see is this what happens in your lungs and in your kidneys. So look in the upper right-hand graph there. In your lungs, all right, you need to get rid of CO2, and the kidneys can also get rid of CO2 by putting it into the urine. So you can see the equations, the reaction can run either way. All right, and that's what's going on. When you breathe out carbon dioxide, you're running that reaction in the direction to produce free carbon dioxide. One of the things the kidney does is it tries to remove acid from your body, so it runs the reaction in the other direction and dumps hydrogen into your urine. Urine is normally somewhat acidic, okay? We're going to be talking about all this in great detail in the weeks to come, but I just want to preview it for you right now. Your kidneys or your lungs, both of them, the bicarbonate ion is a big deal because they are the two main controls over acid-base balance in your body, and they control the acid base by using the bicarbonate ion. Functions with the respiratory and urinary systems, that's what I've been saying here. To lower pH, the kidneys excrete the bicarbonate, and to raise pH, the kidneys excrete hydrogen, and the lungs excrete CO2. That's how your body controls acid and base. We have an entire chapter in your book on acid-base balance and electrolytes. So you're actually going to be doing homework on acid-base balance, and it will always come back to the bicarbonate ion and the kidneys and the lungs. Okay, so here's your preview. We're going to be covering it in much more detail. Okay, which of the following substances would have the easiest time crossing the phospholipid bilayer? You can expect questions like this on every quiz and every exam this semester. You have to know ions and solutes and fluids forever. You have to know them every single moment of your life. So just get used to that. Expect questions on every quiz and every exam that once again deal with ions and fluids. And so here you go. Which one? Which one is going to have the easiest time? That will be oxygen, all right? Remember, it's a gas. It goes right across. Why won't fructose go? Because it's big and it's water soluble. Why not calcium? Because it's charged. Why not amino acids? Because they're big and they're water soluble. Why not vitamin C? Because it's big and it's water soluble. Gases go right across. All right. Notice I'm asking you things that I may not have mentioned exactly, precisely by name. But again, in Bio 202, we expect you to be able to figure things out. All right. Here you go. Great overall summary of the stuff we've been looking at. There you see ECF and ICF and all the ions. Okay. Nice summary graph right there showing what's going on. Okay, osmotic pressure. This turns out to be a huge concept in Bio 202 because it determines the movement of fluids inside of your body. So, osmotic pressure, what do we mean by that? It's a difference in the number of solutes on either side of a membrane, okay? So, like on the left-hand side, look at that beaker on the top, okay? So what's going to happen is we're going to see it's got little small solutes in those little small purple ones, or lavender maybe. I watch a show called Project Runway with my wife. I've been trying to learn color terms like puce and mauve and fuchsia and periwinkle and teal. I think those are sort of lavender. I don't know. I'm still learning. But you can see there we have a beaker of water, and there is a membrane. That dotted line, the dashed line, that's supposed to be a membrane. Think of like plastic wrap, okay? Now that plastic wrap has got tiny, tiny pores in it that will allow small solutes to pass back and forth. But big solutes it will not allow to pass back and forth. So this is basically a little demonstration here. So imagine in the top beaker we've got that plastic wrap in place. It's dividing the beaker in half. We've got a bunch of fluid. We've got all those small solutes in there, all right? Now they will come to equilibrium. Again, they will diffuse across that plastic wrap membrane and equal themselves out. That's what all things do in the universe. Equilibrium, all right? They will come to equal concentrations. Now what happens then if we drop a bunch of big solutes onto side A of that beaker? Those big solutes cannot get across that membrane. They are stuck on side A. You know what will happen? Look at the bottom illustration on that left-hand. Look at the bottom of the left-hand illustration. Once we drop those big solutes into side A, the water will actually rise on that side and go lower on the other side. Now remember, water can easily pass through that membrane. So why isn't the water equaling out? Osmotic pressure. As it turns out, the water will go to where there are more solutes. That's the function of osmotic pressure. That's the effect of osmotic pressure, all right? When you first, sometimes they do this as a demonstration, like in a chemistry lab. And when you do this demonstration, a lot of times students go, wait a minute, that's not real. How did you do that? You're using magnets or something. No, that's real. Water will move to where there are more solutes. And in fact, we say, and here's the phrase to remember, water follows solutes. Write that down. Tattoo that on your forehead. Water follows solutes. So when we're trying to figure out where fluids are going to go to in the body, all we have to look and see is where are there more solutes. Wherever there are more solutes, fluid will travel to that location, okay? So hydrostatic pressure is the opposing force of osmotic pressure. So the weight of the water counteracts osmotic pressure. So there's always kind of like a fight between osmotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure to see who wins, okay? Sometimes one wins, sometimes the other. It depends on the amount of fluid and on the number of solutes, okay? So water will diffuse across that membrane to maintain osmotic balance. And here's all you have to remember. Water follows solutes. That will solve 98.3% of all questions that involve osmotic pressure. Just remember that principle. Water follows solutes, okay? And you'll get the answer 98.3% of the time, okay? Which is good enough for an A. That's really pretty much an A+. So why do we care about all this? Let's talk about some cardiovascular physiology. So here in your body, blood has to deliver oxygen and glucose and other nutrients to the tissues. So after leaving the blood, those solutes move through the ISF and then are taken up by cells. Now, cells secrete waste products like carbon dioxide, urea, and lactic acid into the ISF, which are then taken up by the blood, okay? So what we're seeing here in this illustration, you got oxygenated blood, an arteriole on the left, deoxygenated blood, a venule on the right. And what we're seeing here is that on the left-hand side, notice that nutrients are leaking out, and on the right-hand side, waste products are leaking in. And you're thinking, wait a minute, how do they know which way to go? Yeah, it's all about osmotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure. That determines which way the solutes go. So nutrients tend to leak out on the arterial side, waste products tend to leak in on the vein side, the venule side. That's all determined by pressure. There are no traffic lights. It's pressures that do that. So most of the organ systems we study exchange water and solutes. Movement depends in part on concentration gradients and on osmotic pressure, okay? Let's take a look here at some respiratory physiology. Look carefully. Look inside of that red blood cell. That's what we got right in the center of the picture. That's a big red blood cell. Look what's happening inside. You see there's CO2 plus H2O, H2CO3, HCO3 minus H plus. Yes, by golly, it's what we were just talking about. Carbonic acid, the bicarbonate ion, the free acids. Look what's going on here. In the lungs, we need to get oxygen from the air into our red blood cells, and we need to get carbon dioxide out of our body, out into the air. We need to breathe it out. How does that happen? It happens basically, the movement of gases across the blood and lungs depends on the movement of ions across the membranes, all right? So all those ions, those are determining the exchange of gases in our lungs. All has to do with ions, all right, and solutes. What's principal anion of the lymph? You're going, wait, lymph, did we talk about that? Yes, we did. What kind of fluid is lymph? Is lymph ICF or ECF? Lymph is ECF. Therefore, what's going to be the major anion of lymph, which is ECF? And by golly, it has to be chloride, all right? Because chloride goes where sodium goes, and sodium is in the ECF, and lymph is ECF, all right? All right, you got to think it through. May not have said that specifically, but that was figure-outable. And once again, why do we care about all this? Well, let's take a look in some urinary physiology. So what we got in this illustration, on the right-hand side, you see a blood vessel. Notice there's some interstitial fluid. And on the left, we see a proximal convoluted tubule cell. That's a cell inside of your kidney. In something called the nephron, which is basically what filters things out of your blood and into your urine. And then you see the fluid in the tubule, lumen. Lumen means the hollow space inside of the tubule. So look what's going on here. We've got, look inside of the proximal convoluted tubule cell, the one in the middle. Look what's going on there. Looks like we've got some H2O and some CO2, and they're making some H2CO3, which is coming apart into free hydrogen and that bicarbonate ion. Look at that. Look at, then see that lavender little arrow there? See how sodium is going from inside the cell out into the ISF? What's doing that? Look at the key on the right. There's a sodium-potassium pump. Look over on the left where sodium and hydrogen are being exchanged. That's a pump that's pumping sodium and hydrogen so that it's putting hydrogen into the urine. It's taking acid out of your body, putting it into the urine. This is what the kidney does. Your kidney is controlling your acid-base balance by moving ions around. Carbonic acid, hydrogen, bicarbonate ion, sodium. That's what's happening. And notice all the fluids. We've got extracellular fluid, intracellular fluid, interstitial fluid, blood. We never finish talking about this. This is from urinary system, which is like in week 13 of the semester, all right? This stuff never, ever goes away, all right? So kidneys use channels and transporters to exchange solutes with the blood. And understanding these organ systems requires familiarity with body fluids, ion concentrations, along with how solids move across membranes. Okay, that's it for this PowerPoint. We still got more to go with fluids in the ANS.